since we're talking on that dot connection, I really love that analogy. In hindsight, how did you now, when you look back at where you are today and looking back at where you started from, how did those dots connect? Because I know people, they're carrying on their careers and sometimes they get in situations they're like, I don't even know how I ended up here. So I would love for you to share how your reflective process of connecting the dots really brought you where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in high school and I was looking at going to university, and it was like, well, I was either gonna, because my what was presented to me was so limited, which is still true today. I was like, well, I'm interested in behavior, so maybe psychology, but I'm really interested in art and designing in the creative process, so maybe I'll go to an art school. And I picked RISD, well, one, because I got in, but RISD was affiliated with Brown, so I could go to, one of the best art schools in the world, connected to an Ivy League institution where I could study psychology. And I thought that I would run in parallel. And then I discovered a field called industrial design, which is really product design, design strategy, and it's very like user-centric, behavior-driven creative process, and it brought the two together.
That's very powerful because I know even when I graduated from school, it's like doctor, lawyer, teacher, nurse. And it was in, and I, when I got to university, I learned about engineering and then all of these other fields. And as, years progressed, all these different titles that never existed continue to evolve. And it's interesting because I do wish that people would have said, hey, there's going to be new titles created all the time.
Yeah,
you never know.
And you're most likely going to create your job. If you want the best one, create it.
Yeah, I love that. So the brand new book, tell us a little bit about what ignited the empathy advantage.
Sure. So Chris Shipley, my co-author, and I had written the book, The Adaptation Advantage, which came out of research she'd done in technology, because her background is as a technology journalist. And then my experience on both the supply side, education, and the demand side of talent, working for corporations. And I was seeing that the talent that we needed, the workforce that we needed, was not being created by the educational systems. We weren't attracting, nurturing, and retaining the right people on the workforce side. So I started explaining things, and it just came out of that need to explain things to both audiences. Adaptation Advantage came out in April 2020, height of the pandemic. It was crazy. It became an accidental guide, really, to how to navigate the pandemic, because it was called The Adaptation Advantage. Right. And then as work changed through the pandemic and a bunch of things came to head, many of which were long in the making, I realized the zeitgeist had really shifted, and no economic downturn is going to shift it back. So I took the last year and a half or 2 years of talks, and I said, there's a book here and there's a very short timeline to get it into people's hands. Right. So we wrote it in somewhere around 90 or 100 days. Quickly, we just brought together the stuff that I was seeing and hearing. And that comes out March 8th, which I think is today, as we're recording this a little bit ahead of time. And it's really your guide to the zeitgeist.
And it's, profound that you found this window of time knowing that this is what people needed, because the pandemic forever changed us all. Mm-hmm. And, with the pandemic, in your book, you talk about how the pandemic accelerated change. And there was a digital transformation due to human transformation. I would love for you to explain a little bit more about how technology has changed us and how we have changed with technology. Sure.
So one of the things that I noted in the first couple of months that we went into the pandemic, I actually wrote an article in Forbes in mid-March, really 2 weeks or so after the CDC declared it a global pandemic. And I looked around and I said, I think this is the greatest catalyst to business transformation in history. I didn't have the data then. I have since got the data that basically McKinsey found we leapt forward 5 years in our digital transformation in the first 60 days. And why was that? It was because we were starting to use the tools that were all around us. We're recording this over Zoom. Zoom came out in 2010 or 2011.
Right.
That's a decade ago. So when we talk about it being human transformation, we just start adapting our behaviors finally to the technology that were there. And then, one of the other examples I use is the speed in which we developed a vaccine, which had to do with available technologies and behavior. So we had the ability of genomic sequence, which we had not had in the past for a virus. That gave us a huge advantage when we were looking at vaccine candidates. We also had computational immunology. We had the ability to use machine learning to simulate what the different vaccine candidates would do in the body. And then we had global collaboration, because the person who discovered the genomic sequence did not just share it with a couple of top research institutions or companies. He tweeted it out and said anybody can get started on this. So we had unprecedented global collaboration and then new technology, and that now it allowed us to really accelerate something we had never been able to do before.
And when you talk about global collaboration, and we see this as a mass pandemic, everybody working toward a common cause, that when you think about the unsettling in the world, that how many times in the world have we ever seen that type of global collaboration of people actually working together in all parts of the world, regardless of our differences?
Well, one of the places we did see it is after the murder of George Floyd, because the Black Lives Matter protests became the largest sustained protest in the history of the world. And so people came together from other countries and cultures and communities, all saying that, that this is something that has long needed to change, and now we're standing together to see some of those changes through.
Yeah. And one of the things, I know we've already talked about a little bit about the acceleration of change, but it brought dramatic changes to the workplace. What exactly has changed in the workplace itself?
Yeah, so the highest level, like if I only had time in an elevator with you between, for us to go, 10 floors or something, this is how I would explain it. I think what's happened is there are two transformations that have taken place. One is a fundamental change in the relationship between individuals and organizations. We once exchanged loyalty for security with an organization. We'd spend our whole life with it. Then we looked to have a career with an organization, and we would invest and they would invest in our career. And then it sort of became bundled from there. And now the workforce is empowered, and they have to meet individuals where they are. That is the first shift. I'm sorry, the first transformation. The second transformation is from linear to complex. After 15 years of digital disruption, we now operate how we operate as organizations has changed. Many of the models we've used in the past, many of the metrics and measures we've used in the past are becoming increasingly ineffective, and in some cases a liability. So the real heart of this book is to say that we need 4 transformations in leadership. First is a shift from mindset shift from managing people to enabling success. And the simple way I say this to folks is you're kind of used to the idea that your people work for you. The reality is you work for your people, because your success is dependent upon their success. So that's the first mindset shift. The second is a shift in approach from peers as competitors to peers as collaborators. When you were that sort of unquestioned boss, you used to pit your people against each other to compete for your attention or for praise. Now, most people are managing teams full of people who have skills and knowledge they don't have. So you can't pit your people against each other. You need your people to collaborate. So it's a movement from a reliance on individual intelligence to a need to harness collective intelligence. The third shift is a shift in approach from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. So we're not going to get people to learn and adapt at the speed, scale, and scope that we need through punishments, threats, and rewards. That simply won't work at this scale and this speed. So we need to help folks get in touch with their internal drive so they become self-propelled. And then the fourth shift is a movement away from being that unquestioned expert who makes decisions in certainty and motivates with domination, fear, even humiliation, to a leader who can be who can be a humble, curious learner and inspire folks with effectiveness through inspiration, caring, love, and belonging.
When I think about culture, I think also about we have such a multi-generational workforce. People are staying in the workforce longer. People are, just this disruption has created a lot of learning that needed to go about and a lot of adaptation. The cookie cutter approaches to a multi-generational workforce no longer work, as we have different values and different stages of life. I would love for you to, talk about how the organizations need to be leading differently in supporting this multi-generational workforce?
Sure. So the 4 shifts that I just talked about, mindset, behavior, approach, and culture, all really rely on empathy to be effective. And this is also true when you're looking at it from how do I manage a multi-generational workforce? So you've got boomers, Gen X, millennial, and Gen Z is really what we're talking about. Boomers are starting to exit the workforce. They estimate about 75 million boomers will retire by 2030. That's going to leave a big gap, knowledge gap, as well as actual open positions in the workplace. Now you look at boomers. Boomers came out of, civil rights, sexual revolution. They had a pretty decent investment in infrastructure and education. They, put their heads down. They worked hard, and their attitude and their approach is sort of like, I worked hard, I sacrificed. Why don't you? That's the most consistent sort of, why do these kids today, why don't they work? Gen Z comes along next, and I'm Gen Z, and I gotta say, Gen X, we need a marketing department. Because I'll go into a room and say, when I'm speaking, and say, raise your hand if you're boomer, raise your hand if you're Gen X, raise your hand if millennial, raise your hand if you're Gen Z. And then I say, now, if you were born between 1965 and 1980, and you did not raise your hand, please raise your hand. And they raise their hand, and I say, well, congratulations, welcome to Gen X. You didn't know you were it, which is the most Gen X thing ever, is not knowing that. So Gen X's doesn't really have a strong identity, which is sort of a mistake, because we were the first latchkey kids. Our parents started to get divorced. It wasn't the norm until millennials. Our parents started to lose their jobs. So we felt less of a commitment to work. We didn't feel that loyalty because we saw that loyalty agreement reneged for our parents. We were the first generation to bring work home, or start to, because we started to get cell phones and email when we began work. Also, Spotify, I don't think would exist because we made the mixtape. So I like to throw that out there from a cultural standpoint.
That's true.
So Gen Xers get overlooked a lot, but I think they really span digitization being part of their work. They were kind of the first generation to be in the analog and the digital. Millennials come next. Millennials are the first generation for which divorce was a norm. There was more focus on the child as a way to kind of bind the family together. They also came into the workforce just on the heels of the global financial crisis. So many of them feel like they're not going to catch up. So they have even a little bit less loyalty than Gen X when it comes to work. Yeah. And then Gen Z, which is just entering the workforce now, but will be 30% of the workforce by 2030. Entirely different set of experiences. And I often do a deep dive into Gen Z because I don't think they're fully understood. They have been in constant trauma. They were born in 9/11. They don't know a time before terrorism or the the global war on terror. They had mass school shootings as a norm. They had the global financial crisis when they were in grade school, so they started to feel economic fragility relatively early. The UN climate report, a lot of them took that really to heart, that we had 12 years to save the planet in 2018. So you've talked to a lot of Gen Zers who say, I'm not going to have children, the planet's not going to be there. Black Lives Matter movement, Me Too movements, those movements were taking place when they were starting to have more social conscious. They don't really know a time without war because we were in Afghanistan, and now Ukraine is, popping up. They ended their education or entered the workforce in a global pandemic. So it's not surprising when you look at all these life stages and events that they're more fragile, that they have more issues around mental health and wellness, more anxiety and more depression. What I say to folks is, if you have a Gen Zer in your basement, it's going to be okay. They're going to move slowly, but they're going to cut a wide path. I think Gen Zers are going to change work in a way that's really important. They want to work with a sense of purpose, or not at all. And that might be better for all of us.